In a cemetery in Cardiff, Wales, there is a gravestone with two words carved into it that no other headstone in Britain carries. Not beloved father, not rest in peace. Two words in English and in Arabic, killed by injustice. The man buried beneath them was hanged by the British state in 1952 for a murder he did not commit. It took 46 years for anyone in a position of power to admit that. It took 70 years for the police, who built the case against him, to say the word sorry. This is the story of Mahmood Hussein Mattan, a Somali seaman, a husband, a father of three, and the last man ever executed at Cardiff Prison. Mahmood Hussein Mattan was born in 1923 in British Somaliland, a British protectorate on the Horn of Africa, in what is now Somaliland. Like thousands of young Somali men of his generation, he went to sea. The British Merchant Navy recruited heavily from the Horn of Africa, and for a young man looking for work and a future, a life on British cargo ships was one of the only doors open to him. That door led him, in the mid-1940s, to Cardiff, specifically to a small, densely packed dockside neighborhood called Tiger Bay. Tiger Bay was, by the standards of 1940s Britain, remarkable. It was one of the most racially and culturally diverse communities in the entire country, home to Somali, Yemeni, Caribbean, Maltese, and Irish families, all living within a few streets of each other, all connected in one way or another to the docks. It was here, working in the cosmopolitan chaos of dockside Cardiff, that Mahmood met a young woman named Laura Williams. She worked in a local paper factory. They fell for each other quickly, marrying within 3 months of meeting. It was not an easy marriage to have in 1940s Britain. Mahmood was black, Muslim, and foreign-born. Laura was white and Welsh. The couple endured open hostility from parts of the local community simply for being together. They had 3 sons. By 1950, the marriage had become strained, and the couple separated, though they continued living on the same street, co-parenting their children. Mahmood left the Merchant Navy around 1949 and took various jobs on land, including work at a steel foundry. He was, by every account that exists, an ordinary working man trying to get by in a country that made that harder for him than it needed to be. That ordinary life ended on the evening of March 6, 1952. Lily Volpert was 42 years old. She owned a general outfitter's shop in the Docklands area of Cardiff, selling clothes, and on the side, lending small amounts of money to local residents, which made her a familiar and sometimes resented figure in the neighborhood. On the evening of March 6th, just after 8 o'clock, Lily closed up her shop for the night and was preparing to join her family for supper in the back room. Then the shop doorbell rang. Her sister and her mother both saw a man standing outside the door. Lily went to deal with him. A few minutes later, her niece saw her at the door again, talking, this time, to what looked like a different man. Shortly after that, another customer walked into the shop and found Lily's body. Her throat had been cut with a razor or a sharp blade. Roughly 100 pounds, equivalent to well over 2,500 pounds today, had been taken from the till. The Cardiff City Police needed a suspect, and they needed one fast. A white woman murdered in her own shop, in a neighborhood the local press had already taken to describing with thinly veiled suspicion because of its racial diversity. This was, by the standards of the press and the public of 1952, exactly the kind of case that demanded a quick arrest. Within 2 hours of the murder being discovered, 2 detectives were standing outside Mahmood Mattan's lodgings. Here is what the police found when they searched his room that night. Nothing. No blood-stained clothing. No trace of the stolen money. No weapon. Nothing connecting him to the crime at all. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Police interrogated Mattan at length. They organized an identification parade, a lineup, and brought in Lily Volpert's own sister, mother, and niece, the 3 people who had actually seen the man, or men, at the shop door that night. None of them identified Mahmood Mattan. At this point, in any properly functioning investigation, Mattan should have been ruled out. The family, who had seen the killer's face twice, did not pick him. Instead, the police turned to two other witnesses, a pair of women named Mary Tolley and Margaret Bush, who had been in the shop shortly before it closed. In their initial statements, both women described the shop in detail. Neither mentioned seeing any other man there. After Mattan came under suspicion, police showed both women a photograph of him. Both said they recognized him, but only because they knew him from around the neighborhood. They hadn't seen him in about a month. Then something changed. After what the official record later described as further intensive questioning, Mary Tolley gave a new statement. This time, she said Mattan had come into the shop while she and Margaret Bush were there and had then left. Margaret Bush, who had been in the exact same room at the exact same time, still said she had seen no one. 10 days after the murder, Mahmood Mattan was arrested and charged with Lily Volpert's killing. What happened next, over the following months, is a case study in how a wrongful conviction gets built, one suppressed inconvenience at a time. Mary Tolley changed her statement again, now saying she hadn't actually seen Mattan leave the shop after all. The police needed a way to explain why the family had seen someone at the door after Tolley and Bush had already left, a detail in their original statements that didn't fit the timeline the police were now building. Their solution was simple. They suppressed those original statements and argued instead that the family's sightings must have happened earlier than they'd said. Before the case even reached the magistrate's court, police brought in another potential witness, a 12-year-old girl who had visited the shop around 8 o'clock that evening and had seen a dark-skinned man nearby. She was shown Mattan. She said he was not the man she had seen. That, too, did not stop the case moving forward. During the committal hearing in April, Mary Tolley changed her evidence yet again, this time failing to identify Mattan as the man who had entered the shop. But the prosecution had, by then, found the witness they needed, a Jamaican man named Harold Cover, who had a known history of violence. Cover said he had walked past Lily Volpert's shop around the time of the murder and seen two Somali men outside, one of them 6 feet tall, standing near the door. In court, Cover identified that man as Mahmood Mattan. What the jury was never told, what would not become public for another 46 years, was that Harold Cover had originally identified a different Somali man entirely, a local resident named Tahir Gas. The trial opened at the Glamorgan Assizes in Swansea on July 22, 1952, in front of Mr. Justice Ormerod and a jury. Harold Cover was the prosecution's central witness. Another witness, a woman named May Gray, testified that she had seen Mattan with a large amount of cash shortly after the murder. Mattan's own barrister suggested Gray was lying, pointing out that the Volpert family had offered a £200 reward for information, a substantial sum at the time, of which Cover later received a share. The forensic evidence amounted to this: microscopic specks of blood found on a pair of Mattan's shoes. The shoes, however, had been recovered from a salvage dump, and there was no scientific way to connect that blood to Lily Volpert at all. Mary Tolley testified again. The jury was never told that other witnesses, including the victim's own family, had failed to identify Mattan. Mattan's defense barrister did succeed in getting a significant portion of the prosecution's evidence ruled inadmissible due to legal restrictions then in place around questioning suspects in custody. But in his closing speech, the speech meant to be Mahmood Mattan's last line of defense. His own barrister described his client to the jury as half child of nature, half semi-civilized savage. That sentence, delivered by the one person whose job was to protect him, was the last substantial thing the jury heard before they retired to consider their verdict. They found Mahmood Mattan guilty of murder. The judge passed the only sentence the law allowed for murder in 1952, death. Mattan's lawyers applied for leave to appeal and to call further evidence, It was refused in August 1952. The Home Secretary considered whether to grant a reprieve, to commute the death sentence to imprisonment. He decided not to. On the morning of September 3, 1952, 6 months almost to the day after Lily Volpert's murder, Mahmood Hussein Mattan was hanged at Cardiff Prison. He was 28 years old. He left behind a wife he had married within months of meeting her, and 3 young sons, the eldest not yet 5. He was the last person ever executed at Cardiff Prison. In 1954, 2 years after Mattan's execution, a man named Tahir Gas was convicted of murdering a wages clerk in a country lane near Newport. The attack was frenzied. The medical evidence at his trial showed he was suffering from schizophrenia and was, at the time, delusional. He was found insane and sent to Broadmoor. This was the same Tahir Gas that Harold Cover had originally identified, before changing his identification to Mahmood Mattan. In 1969, after Harold Cover was convicted of an unrelated and disturbingly similar crime, the attempted murder of his own daughter, her throat cut with an open razor, Mattan's family made their first attempt to reopen the case. The Home Secretary at the time, James Callaghan, declined. It would take almost 3 more decades. In the mid-1990s, Britain established the Criminal Cases Review Commission, a new independent body created specifically to investigate potential miscarriages of justice. Mahmood Mattan's case was the very first case the commission referred to the Court of Appeal. On February 24, 1998, 45 years, 5 months, and 21 days after Mahmood Mattan was hanged, the Court of Appeal ruled. Lord Justice Rose described the original prosecution as demonstrably flawed. The conviction was quashed. Mattan's widow, Laura, and their 3 sons were awarded £725,000 in compensation, the first time in British history that a family received compensation for a wrongful execution. In 1996, 2 years before the conviction was even formally overturned, the family had been given permission to exhume Mahmood's remains from the prison grounds, where his widow had never been permitted to visit, and rebury him in consecrated ground in the Muslim section of Western Cemetery in Cardiff. It is there that his headstone reads, in English and Arabic, "Killed by injustice." In September 2022, on the 70th anniversary of his execution, South Wales Police, the modern successor to the force that built the case against him, issued a formal apology to Mattan's family. They admitted the original prosecution had been flawed. 70 years is a long time to wait for 4 words. Mahmood Mattan's life did not end well, and neither, in many ways, did the lives of those he left behind. His son Omar was found dead on a Scottish beach in 2003. His youngest son, Mervyn, died in 2011, after years of struggling with alcohol, a coroner's inquest attributing his death, in part, to dependence brought on by a life shaped by what had happened to his father. There is no version of justice that gives any of that back. What there is a name cleared, a headstone that tells the truth, and a case that, because it was the very first the Criminal Cases Review Commission ever referred, helped build the legal mechanism that has since corrected dozens of other miscarriages of justice in Britain. Mahmood Hussein Mattan came to Wales from Somaliland looking for work and found a wife, 3 sons, and a community in Tiger Bay that, in its own complicated way, was home. The country he had built a life in took that life away for a crime committed, almost certainly by someone else. It took 46 years to say so. If this story moved you, there are dozens more like it. People the system failed, and the truth that eventually caught up, sometimes decades too late. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next one. And if you have a case you think deserves to be told properly, leave it in the comments. I read everyone.